Hello and happy Friday, and thanks for tuning in to RadioFreeRhinecliff.org. In this show in particular, correct me if I'm Norm, I'm your host, Norm. And I'm so excited to have Andy Ostroy here tonight. Andy is a local guy, part-time resident, father, part owner of Samuel's, and filmmaker. And thanks for coming, Andy.
Thanks for having me.
What a blast! It's weird, because I've been researching. I watched this documentary you made today, and then I bumped into you in town. I'm like, oh, there's that guy from the movie, and it was so good. The documentary you made called Adrienne was really so moving in so many parts, and I knew the story already because you had told me. But thanks for making it. It's an incredible piece of art.
You're welcome. I thank you for watching it and everyone else who's seen it.
And it's showing tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Upstate Films.
Yeah, we're doing a special screening tomorrow, one-time screening with a Q&A/discussion afterwards, which will be moderated by Lacey Schwartz Delgado.
Oh, great.
Acclaimed filmmaker.
Right.
It should be fun.
Yeah, so there's a Q&A. So this is coming here is basically practice for.
This is the PQ.
I'm going to guess a better Q&A, the big league Q&A. So the film will show, and then afterwards, I've got 2 tickets. Let me just say, if anybody wants to get tickets, go to upstatefilms.org.
Right.
And you can buy tickets there.
Yep.
So the film will play, and then afterwards you'll be talking to Lacey Schwartz Delgado.
Yeah, we'll talk about the film and filmmaking, and for people who've been to a Q&A before, it can get really interesting. A lot of the inside stuff that you don't get from just watching a film.
Right. And how's the film doing? When was it released?
It premiered on HBO December 1st.
Okay. And does HBO have some metrics? Do they share with you like 100,000 people saw it, or?
It's done really well, they say.
And
which means either they don't give me numbers or they have, and I've been sworn to secrecy, but I can't say which one.
No, yes, you can. You can say which one.
It's done really well, they say. They're very happy.
Right. And so if they do have numbers, they don't want to advertise that?
It's that kind of stuff in the TV world is I think more guarded than in the film world. Like you can go to Box Office Mojo. You can see stats more readily available in film, and it's more closely guarded. I think probably for a lot of competitive reasons than in the TV world.
Right. Interesting. And how did this film end up at HBO?
Did a pitch.
And you did a pitch before it was made to get the funding to make it, and then they would show it.
Yeah, I had producing partners, and we went in, and they had a relationship with HBO because they've done some films with HBO, and that was the first stop on the pitch tour, and it was a great meeting. We walked out and looked at each other and thought about, well, should we pitch somewhere else too and see? And I felt like, this is HBO. Where else am I going to go?
It's got an amazing reputation for documentary films.
So it was like, if they loved it, let's do it. I mean,
And when did that happen?
That was 18. I'm kind of spacing. It was, I think, around June of 2018.
Okay.
And it took a few months to greenlight. But there was never a wavering of interest. It was always, we're interested, there's a lot of content at HBO. So they have a lot of deals going on at any given time.
4 years.
Yeah, so from beginning to end.
3 or 4 years to get that.
It was about 4 years, yeah.
Enormous project. Right? A huge, and have you ever had projects of that length before?
Trying to get my teenage daughter to clean her room. It's still going on.
That's a good answer.
Yeah, we haven't finished yet, so yeah.
Right. And in the documentary, you talk about your teenage daughter being a mess and having a messy room, and you suspect that she got that from her mother, Adrienne.
Oh, I don't suspect.
You know.
Yeah, it's genetic.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was, but it is. It's actually genetic.
So, spoiler alert to everybody listening. We're going to talk about the film and what. And,
What?
Yeah. Sorry, Andy. You signed.
This is
a
not what
waiver.
I signed up for, Norm.
So her mother died when she was like 3. Right?
2 3/4 to be
2
exact,
3/4. And so do you see things from her mother that you're like, oh, that's totally hereditary. And you can say that because she didn't really grow up with her mother, seeing her mother's mannerisms and all that stuff.
No, absolutely. I mean, she has a striking physical resemblance to Adrienne, and so that as the baseline just propels everything else forward. So there are moments where she'll say something, she'll do something, she'll act a certain way, and I'll say to her, "You are literally your mother right now," and it's kind of freaky.
Yeah. And so do you ever like turn around and like see her and think, oh, there's Adrienne?
Yeah, all the time.
Ugh.
Yeah, it brings on a wave of emotions. It runs from everything of like just marveling at how DNA works,
Yeah.
to, oh, that makes me sad. It reminds me of Adrienne. Or, oh my God, it makes me sad because Adrienne and Sophie aren't able to hang out together and
Right.
be silly together. And so, but I'd rather have it that way. It's kind of like, Billy Joel and Christy Brinkley, right? They get together, they have a child, right? Kid grows up, looks exactly like the dad. Your mother is one of the most beautiful women on the planet.
I was not aware of that.
You look like your dad.
Yeah.
And so
genetics, it's not always good.
Yeah, and I'm very happy that she looks more like Adrienne overall than me, because for the family, that's just it's a nice thing to have this constant reminder of Adrienne, especially for Adrienne's mom.
For the family, it's a nice thing, but you just described, it not so nice for you to turn around and see Adrienne standing there. That's sad. Is it always sad, or sometimes you turn around and think?
It's everything.
Okay.
It's like, grief is a very weird thing. Like, you can have somebody who was important to you as a child, and you 50 years later, you hear a song that reminds you of them, and you can start to weep. But most of the time you're not weeping, but that moment you weep. So when grief hits you, it comes on whenever and however, and so a lot of times I look at her and I laugh and I go, wow, that's silly, just like your mom, and it's fun and it's great.
Right.
Another time it'll touch me in a way that's a little bit more somber, dark.
And, I had this interview all planned out. We were going to start with your youth in Far Rockaway and sort of get
By the
to
way,
this.
you're doing amazingly well. I'm
thanks.
I'm super impressed with you. And the setup here is amazing.
Well, that's all Matt.
It's incredible.
Radio
Matt,
Free Runcliffe.
Jen, all you guys are, there's like 1 million people in the room, by the way.
But the plan somehow went out the window, and we jumped to the shark, and now we're talking about grief. But some people
because it's so
listening-
much fun. No.
So, yeah, it's the best.
I can never get enough of grief.
Well, I got a quotation from you that we'll try it out later. But we jumped the shark. Can you explain to listeners what we're talking about? Specifically your grief?
Yes. I was married to an actor and writer and filmmaker named Adrienne Shelly. She kind of burst onto the scene in the early 90s as kind of a muse of Hal Hartley, who was a pioneer independent filmmaker. Her first 2 films, Trust, The Unbelievable Truth, and then Trust, were huge hits, and a real product of that time. So, and then she did a bunch of movies, after that, maybe 20 movies, and then started making her own films, which she wrote, directed, and starred in. So the first was Sudden Manhattan, I think in 1997, and then maybe a year and a half later, she made I'll Take You There, which starred Ali Sheedy, and then Waitress, which was made in 2005, came out in 2007, and it was a pretty big hit. As an independent film, it did, I think, like 22 million at the box office, and it was tied for the 4th highest grossing film Memorial Day weekend in 2007, which is huge.
Which is amazing for an indie film.
Incredible. And so she was murdered in 2006 in the old apartment where she lived, which she maintained as an office. So she would go there to write, and she encountered a construction worker who broke into her apartment, and she found him in her living room, and the rest is history. It didn't end well for Adrienne, and later that day, after me not being able to reach her all day, I went over to check on her, and I found her dead. So it's a really awful story.
Yeah, I remember you came over one day. Some mutual friend said,
Thanks, Norm.
Oh, yeah. Well, you said grief is the best, so you're welcome.
I was lying, Norm. Grief sucks.
Yeah, I remember a friend introduced us. You came over, we talked, and you told me a story, and my jaw was just dropped the entire time. And I guess I probably asked, what are you working on? And you were working on this documentary, which I watched today, and people can watch tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Upstate Films. And it's just amazing. It's a phenomenally moving and well put together documentary, and you're one of the main characters in it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the, like, it's weird in documentaries. There's like different names for people. Like you could be a character, you could be a narrator, you could be the main subject, but whatever, it all means the same. But I directed the film and also produced it, but I am the main subject. So I do all the interviews. I'm sitting with everyone, talking to all the people that are in the film, and sort of taking the viewer on this journey. Hate that word. Journey with me for 100 minutes.
100 minutes. Yeah. So, but it was probably your idea as well to make this film.
Yes.
And one of the things that you said to me that day when we first met was about why you wanted to make the film.
Right.
What were some of the reasons you wanted to make this movie?
It was about 12 years after she died, 11 or 12 years after she died. And I just thought, people don't know who she is.
Right.
And to those who do, maybe one of the biggest things they know about her is that she was a murder victim. And so I felt that the movie would bring her back to life, even for 100 minutes. It would help people get to know her, maybe fall in love with her, grieve her the way we do, revisit her work, but also, to humanize her, to make her more than just a murder victim. And one of the initial things that I had envisioned was going to the theater where Waitress, 10 years later, after the film came out, 10 years later, became a musical on Broadway.
Right.
And so, and I had taken Adrienne's mother to see the show once, and she got to talking with a group of out-of-town women sitting behind us, and at one point, Adrienne's mom said something like, "Oh, this show is my daughter," and she tried to explain Adrienne and her connection to it, but not she didn't do a good job of it. And one of the women said, "Oh, is she here tonight?" And I started thinking, like, 1,100 people in this audience, how many of them know who she is? And I said, I would love to. And that's really where the idea was born, to make the documentary. And almost immediately I thought, I'm going to come back here with a camera and go down the line and ask people, do you know who Adrienne Shelly is? And you see that in the scene. It comes pretty early in the film. And it was startling to me how that went. And so that was really the main reason to make the film, but also to do it for my daughter, give her this gift that she'll have her whole life, because she never, for all intents and purposes, never really met her mother.
Right.
In terms of her own memories. And this is something she'll have. She'll have, she'll have forever at every stage of her development. She's 18 now, but, she'll be able to watch this as a 25-year-old, as a 40-year-old, as a 60-year-old, as,
Right.
And the way she'll view it will change as she develops.
Right, or not watch it for 20 years and then watch it again 20 years later.
And then the other reason was to make the film was to kind of really find out what happened that day, because the two stories that the killer told previously were both lies. And so I didn't really know truly what happened. And so we get to know what happened.
And before his two stories, there was another story that the cops told that she had committed suicide.
Yeah, well, he staged it as a suicide.
Right.
So it took 5 days for an arrest to be made.
Pretty good. Even considering knowing what I know. And
Yeah,
I won't
well,
spoil
in
this.
retrospect, but I could tell you that those 5 days were the most difficult, emotional, frustrating, painful days of my life.
I'll bet.
Yeah,
So you went to the apartment. You found her there.
yeah.
Called the cops. Or the super called the cops, or your friend called the cops. The cops came. They said, "Oh, it's a suicide," and they sort of wrote it off.
Pretty much.
And you were like, "No, not a suicide. Her film, this amazing movie that she made and sold for millions of dollars, is opening nationwide in a few months. She's got a baby at home. There's no way she did that."
Right.
Yeah. And
I and a bunch of people, nobody accepted it, So friends, family, nobody who knew her could accept that was
but
possible.
the people who didn't, the cops and stuff, were like, "Oh, looks like fucking suicide."
Well, New York, there's so much crime on any given day, and so they're just, if something isn't completely black and white, they move their resources onto the, whatever happened today or tomorrow, and so, all of a sudden a Friday comes along, and which is really what happened, and you start to see something slip away, and so that Friday, November 3rd, was a very pivotal day. It's when the news broke. All the tabloids had the headlines, suicide.
God, that must have been incredibly painful to see that and to know in your heart and soul that it was not true. But
Well,
that
it's-
was the story everybody was getting.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I thought of was my daughter. Like, I understand statistics in terms of what happens to children whose parents commit suicide.
Yeah.
And I didn't want her to have that life sentence, and I it just, that's all I could think of is like, this kid is not going to grow up thinking her mother killed herself.
That's interesting.
So, I was fortunate that I had some tools in my tool belt that I was able to utilize.
And what were they?
I mean, stuff that anyone could do, like call up the news and say, "Hey, I want to talk." Anybody can do that. And if you have somebody in your family who's been murdered, you don't have to be famous or wealthy or whatever. It's just, we see them on TV all the time. The problem is most people don't know they can do that. They don't know the tools that they have available to them.
So did you talk to the press, and that
Yeah.
helped put pressure on the cops to
Well, the
look
Friday,
harder?
the reason I say Friday was pivotal is that when I saw what was happening and this news thing was just becoming huge, and I called the police precinct and I asked for the guy who was running the case, and they said he went home for the weekend. And I said, "Well, give me somebody else who's working the case." And they said, "Well, there's nobody else working the case." And then, it was a back and forth for a minute or two. And he said, I know this is not what you want to hear, but, as far as we're concerned, it's a suicide. And then at that moment, I realized, like, it's the weekend. And if something doesn't turn quickly, like, this is just, all of a sudden there's going to be someone else who gets killed or injured, and they're off and running, and she's history. And so my best friend is a corporate communications guy. He knows his way around the media. And I called him and said, "I got to do something that's bigger than the front page of the New York Post. I don't know what the hell that is, but is that a press conference?" And he said, "No, you don't want to do that. You don't want to, He goes, "We'll pick one person." He goes, "I'll call them. We'll do an exclusive. You go on TV and you'll tell your story, and I'll tell you how to talk, what to say, what not to say." I have a journalism background, so I, consider myself a little media savvy myself. So it was easy to sort of figure out, if we get somebody who's interested, we pretty much will know what to do and what not to do. And so we called, I think it was Eyewitness News, and we became the lead story that Friday night, the 11 o'clock broadcast. And I literally just sat there and said, "My wife did not kill herself. There's evidence. which there was this footprint. I knew that from the night.
You'd seen that already, the footprint.
It was a shoe print, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I knew of it because they were checking everybody's shoes that night, including mine. So before I was able to leave the scene and go to the police station with them, they checked my shoes. So I knew there was something they were checking. And so I didn't know the relevance of it or not. To me, it could have been Adrienne's shoes, because I don't think at that point yet they had checked all of her shoes.
Right.
And this is going to shock you, Norm, but women have a lot of shoes.
No.
So it took them a while to check her shoes. So my goal was just to get on TV and say, hold your horses. This ain't over yet. And that's what I did. And so I said the New York Police Department is the best police department in the world, and I have every confidence that they are going to do a great job and find the guy who killed my wife.
Smart.
And so it was hard. I mean, it was 2 nights after I found her dead, and I had a 2-year-old at home, and it was just like, but I understood the mission, and I was able to compartmentalize that and just get out of my own head and do what had to be done.
And who was your emotional support at this point, and who was your PR support?
Emotional. I had a big family. I have 3 kids from my first marriage. And
Okay.
They were old enough to be very helpful, extremely
Right.
helpful, and they're in the film.
Yeah.
My ex-wife Lisa was incredibly helpful. In fact, she was the first person I called because she lived 2 minutes away. So she came with me, and she was with me at the apartment. She was with me at the police station for hours. I was there till midnight. And from a PR standpoint, my friend Dan Catcher, who he's a pretty serious PR guy. So
Right.
he was guiding me. It's actually a really fascinating thing for another conversation at some point, but how people whose job it is to speak in the media have a whole system of how they don't answer your questions.
Right.
It's kind of fascinating.
But so you got on Eyewitness News with this account that was different from the account all the tabloids ran, saying, no, that's not true. And how did that snowball and get down to the cops and get them to take another look? Where did it go after Eyewitness News?
Apparently, when there's a crime, when there's a murder in New York, you have the local police precinct level, and then you have the homicide squad. Like there's Manhattan South Homicide, which is over by Gramercy somewhere. And so usually those 2 entities are working together on some level. Even if the homicide people are like, yep, you guys are right, it's a suicide. So it's like an extra seal of approval, right? So the homicide squad, and in particular, Detective Piccione, always thought there was something a little amiss. And so the way it was expressed to me is that what I had done and what others had done, like the outcry is what kept him nosing around.
Right.
Whereas maybe if it was something, if I was just like, oh my God, I didn't know she was depressed, and I could have done more. Like if I was, and other people were just, and if she had a history of psychiatric help, or she was, had suicide in her past or whatever. But because there was such a vehement opposition to this concept of suicide, to the point that we all had done it, I think it kept him nosing around. Whereas I think at the local precinct level, they kind of moved on.
Right. So Detective Jimmy Piccione?
Piccione.
Do you still hear from this guy?
Yeah. The irony is I've made friends with some really interesting people because of this.
Right.
Dr. Michael Baden, who's a world-renowned forensics pathologist. I mean, he was literally in the Kardashian house when OJ took off in the white Bronco. Like, this guy was everywhere. Like,
Right.
he was like,
That's
JFK was shot in the head. Like, Dr. Baden was he's involved in so many cases, and I had brought him on to do a private autopsy. That was one of the things that happened that Friday too, was to contact him, just to throw more stuff on the wall and hopefully something would stick. But we've become friends, him and his wife Linda. So yeah, Piccione I've known for years, and he's
a private autopsy. So the police bring in a coroner or something who looks, oh yeah, she hung herself.
Well, yeah, the
suicide.
coroner is automatic. It's like they come and they do the thing and they determine whatever. And I think the original death certificate, cause of death was, I think they said undetermined, or not, like they were still figuring it out.
Okay.
It wasn't one thing or another.
And the private autopsy found what?
Well, the private autopsy was done on the Saturday at around 5 o'clock, and he felt that there was a struggle and
Right.
signs of bruising and things like that were indicators of something not normally found in a suicide.
Right.
So.
Well, it's pretty heads-up stuff.
Try not to give too much away.
Right.
I have stuff, but I'm holding
I
it.
don't
Nora.
remember this part of the movie, but it's pretty heads-up stuff to do that, to bring in somebody, a private coroner or medical investigator.
Well, you know what's crazy? I can't speak for anybody else, but my life is nuts. And so Dr. Baden had a show on HBO called Autopsy, right? Where he would do autopsies of cases and be brought in, and a lot of it was like cold case stuff. But it was a show on HBO.
Right.
Adrienne and I used to watch his show. So there, all of a sudden, I'm like calling this guy.
Out of the blue. You didn't know him?
I didn't know him.
Right.
I said, I'm sure you saw the news, and I left him a message. And I said, I need you to, and I was kind of like pleading with him. I need you to give me stuff to prove that she didn't kill herself.
Right.
And he called back, and I heard that voice that I've been watching on TV, and it was just like insane. So with getting back to your question about have I gotten to know people, and Jimmy, have we gotten to know each other over the years?
Detective Piccione.
Jimmy Piccione. There's also Detective Irma Rivera Duffy, who's in the film. She got the confession out of the killer. But with Dr. Baden, I went from watching him on TV with Adrienne to hiring him to do an autopsy on Adrienne to having dinner with him and his wife years later. It's just a bizarre evolution of human interaction in a way.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Detective Duffy, Irma
Rivera Duffy.
Mm-hmm. And she said the dangest thing in your movie, where she was talking to, at the time, I guess, the suspect, the strong suspect. Turns out he was the murderer. And she said that she told him, I'm going to read this, sometimes when you do something wrong, she said while she was interviewing him, he was like he had these like rosary beads or something. And
it was like a prayer card.
A prayer card. And he kept sort of fingering that. And so she thought, oh, he's a religious guy. And she told him, sometimes when you do something wrong, God doesn't punish you. He punishes someone in your family. And that was it. She said, she knew he had a daughter or a niece the same age as your daughter. And she sort of appealed to that. And he confessed like right away.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, police get confessions sometimes in strange ways.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't, they sometimes do things that we hear about, but we can't be sure of. But yeah, no, she did a mind thing on him, and it worked.
It was impressive.
Yeah.
And are you in touch with her as well?
Yeah. No, we're going to hang out soon with her and my... Yeah, it's so weird, like... you meet people in your life under one situation, but then just depending on how you're wired as a human,
right?
Sometimes that just spills over into other areas. I mean, I mean, it's kind of crazy. What I've experienced in my life from November 1st on versus what it was like November 1st, 2006 prior, it's unbelievable. Highs and lows like I could never have imagined.
Yeah.
So it's just like it is a ride. And, my goal is just to have more highs than lows.
Yeah, well, knock on wood. I hope that works out for you. So the movie's done. It's gorgeous. It's getting out there. It's, as you said, doing well, according to HBO. What's next for you?
Well, right now, I'm enjoying the last 2 or 3 months of just regrouping because it was a pretty harrowing, emotional, taxing 4-year ride.
Right.
And so I'm just, helping to promote the film and just kind of enjoying my grandkids and having the mental freedom to live a little bit the way I wasn't able to before. I do love documentaries. I've learned a lot about making documentaries. I probably will make another one. I have a few ideas. I've already sort of poked around with certain people about.
All right, come on. Our 12 listeners are dying to know what the other ideas are.
12? I heard it was 10.
Oh, well, I'm an exaggerator from way back.
I'm sure you have more than 12. No, the subjects are also about, it'll be a similar theme, similar themes to my film, but not me or my family.
Right.
So there's a lot of people in this world that go through a lot of stuff, a lot of tragedy. They experience grief, loss, et cetera, et cetera. Some are high profile, some are not, but it would be along those lines. I'm also working on a TV show that's in development. I'm not at liberty to discuss that
Okay.
more than that, but that would be really cool if when we can discuss it.
Right. We'll look forward to that. So grief is sort of a theme of this visit. You just brought it up. People, I found people are really clumsy expressing their grief for somebody like you who just experienced this like unspeakable thing. How I want to ask this. I mean, people are just dumb. People are not good at that. How were you dealing with people's clumsiness, stepping up to you like, but, bummer, or maybe she's in a better place, or whatever people say. How were you in that? That seems like a tough place to be.
Yeah, I'm a very forgiving person with stuff like that. I understand that people just can do or say dumb stuff.
Right.
There was a guy who literally a week and a half after Adrienne died called me and said, "I'm in the neighborhood. If you're up for it, I'd like to come hang." And I'm like, out of all the words in the English language, you chose that one.
Yeah.
A week and a half after I found my wife hanging.
Yeah.
I mean,
and somewhere he's kicking himself.
And this was a good friend of hers. And so, to me, it's like people are not. I don't think they're being intentional with stuff like that. They may not be thinking,
right,
but they're not ill-willed. So it's like, all right, he could have said, "Come, visit," but he didn't. He said, "I'll come hang." And so. I get a lot of the she's in a better place or whatever, and I'm like, that stuff I respond to a little bit because I'm not wired that way at all. Like I'm not thinking she's in a better place,
right,
for her or anybody else. So, is a friend of mine who shall go nameless, but when his father died, he said there was a woman that came up to him. And she was like, "Oh, you must be, I'm so sorry. You must be so sad." And whatever. He goes, "Yeah, my dad, he died young. He's just not. What pains me is that he's never going to see his grandchildren." And he said, the woman said, "Oh, he will." And he said, his response was, "No, he won't because he's dead.
Good time for that argument.
And that was like, the perfect, because people do have a tendency, I guess they mean well, but like they'll inject their own personal beliefs and religious beliefs and whatever. And,
Right.
I remember my nanny at the time was like, you're going to tell Sophie that, mommy's in heaven, right? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't believe in
Right.
that there's a heaven. And I'm fine with people who do, but for me, I'm not going to want her walking around her whole life looking up at the sky thinking that's where mommy is. That comes with a whole... And so people, they could be very forward with their advice and their, things they say. And it can happen a lot, which is why it's just so much better to let it, bounce off you.
And so when did you tell Sophie? When did you tell your daughter?
We told her 2 days later. Had gone to a child psychologist that her school, little nursery school, recommended. And just, pretty much told her very limited, like a 15-second thing, which is all a 2 3/4-year-old kid can handle. And she just processed. There were no tears. I mean, it was kind of, to this day, it's kind of amazing how she took it. And the other night we had a conversation where I was sharing with her that, I still don't know, like, if a child learns of a mother's death when she's 2 3/4, is that easier than when she's 8? Yes, probably, because at 8 you have memories and you're going to be really sad and grieving, but it's easier for that 8-year-old when they're 18 to deal with it because then they have memories to look back on.
Right.
So while Sophie sort of took it better, I guess, because she was around 3 years old, it's different for her now because now she doesn't have memories. So it's just one of those things. It's like an argument where you talk to someone, you're like, oh, is it better if someone dies tragically quickly or if they have cancer for 2 years? Like,
Right.
is the pain, is the grief worse? But death is death, and it's never fun. And, so once someone's gone, you grieve. And with a child, it's like when they learn that a parent dies, it's, I don't think it really matters.
So she probably started asking more pointed questions as she grew.
Yes. In fact, in the film, there are animations.
Which I loved.
Yeah, they're based on verbatim conversations that we had from the time Adrienne died till about the time she was 10 years old, because they were fascinating conversations. And I would sit there with my little BlackBerry typing word for word as she was talking. And as she got a little older, I would say to her, I'm listening. I'm just typing everything you're saying because
Right.
someday you're going to want this. And so, yeah, if in the film you see how her thinking progresses over the years by the dialogue that you see in the animations.
Right, which I love Tibet's. And in researching the film, I found at least one critic who's like, oh, it was a great film, but these like animations were not necessary and didn't like those. So,
animations are tricky. They're also like recreations. There are people that love them and there are people that hate them. And I didn't really care because I thought they were great as a concept. HBO loved the idea of them, and it's like it's hard. You can't make a film to please everyone. So,
right.
But it is interesting because those things which are elements of filmmaking or techniques of filmmaking that could be used to enhance the film are the things that people tend to criticize most. Because the people who don't like them will say, "Oh, they're gimmicky,"
It is.
People who love them will say
it's gimmicky.
They're perfect because blah 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 blah. So
and perfect.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to evoke that kind of emotion from someone by just sticking a microphone in someone's face and interviewing them. So it's these extra things like animations or recreations, which are big now. I mean, Errol Morris is a documentarian who's used them for years, and
right.
A lot of documentarians do that now too. But they bring out a strong opinion in people.
So in the film, you're a big presence. You were being interviewed a lot in the film, and other times you're interviewing somebody. When you're being interviewed, who's doing the interviewing?
My producing partner, Mark Levin, who's a filmmaker in his own right.
Oh, right. Mark Levin.
Yeah, he did my interview.
I had no idea he was involved.
Yeah, he has a company called Blowback Productions.
I know. I'm friends with Jamie Lustberg, who you probably know.
Oh, no, I know the name. Yeah. It's funny. Everyone knows Mark. It's great.
Yeah. Well, so that's nice to have a partner in that to do those things and to ask you all of those questions. And you were great in the film.
I just banged your microphone.
And one of the thoughts, I'm just going to read this that you said in there. You said, "I just made a decision early on that I not only need to accept what happened in that shit happens, life's not fair kind of way, but also try to spin some gold for it, to turn what is probably the most horrifying negative that I will ever experience in my life to something positive somewhere, somehow." So that's what got me started very early on, creating a foundation to support women filmmakers, which is
it's in its
beautiful.
15th year now. Yeah, it's we've awarded over 100 production grants. We every once in a while something big happens, which is great. So, for example, in 2021, Chloe Zhao won the Oscar for Best Director.
Right.
She won a grant from us in 2012 when she was just making short films and was working on her first feature. So we know the impact that it's had. You know, Cynthia Wade is another filmmaker who won an Oscar for her short film Freeheld, which we gave her a grant in 2007, which is right after we started, and she won the Oscar in 2008. And if you go to our website, adrienneshelleyfoundation.org, you'll see a letter from Cynthia saying she couldn't have made the film without our funds. So, yeah, it's been great. I mean, we have, other well-known filmmakers like Dee Reese and Andy Sundberg and her partner Ricky Stern, who have made a ton of documentaries, and it's just been one way to sort of spin that gold.
Right. Which is beautiful. And I'm guessing that's you spend some of your time overseeing how the foundation runs.
Yep.
And what's the average amount of a grant that you give to?
5,000 is pretty much what we do.
That's nice.
Yeah, we have a couple that are 3,000, one that's a little more, one that's a sponsorship that's around 10,000.
And where do you get your funding from for the foundation?
It's all crypto.
No.
I sell NFTs of my tweets.
Okay. But I'm just wondering, are there other organizations, foundations that help you guys out?
No. No, we're pretty much alone in the fundraising part of it. We get donations all year long. Pre-COVID, we were doing, an event or two every year or every 2 years. We have done many auctions where celebrity friends have donated their time, so you can, go to lunch with so-and-so.
Right.
And those things raise a lot of money. And
nice. And individual donations, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a plug for you here. It's AdrienneShellyFoundation.org. And there's a big donate button right in the landing page,
Huge.
which is smart.
It's massive.
Well, it's not an unseemly button.
Donate.
But it's there, easy to find.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing you get a bunch of sort of just random individual donations.
Yeah.
And that this movie has probably been pretty good for that.
It's helped, for sure. Yeah.
Right. What's nice is a beautiful thing to spin some gold out of this tragedy.
Yeah. It's never too difficult to get too far away from the simple fact that none of this would exist if Adrienne wasn't murdered.
Right.
So it's just every time you feel, I have to say, as a filmmaker now, when I made a film, you do care. I think if anybody says they don't read reviews, I think they're full of shit. We all care how people see the film, especially people in the business. And so, I was concerned, like everybody else, that I wanted people to like the film, and there were a lot of great reviews. But in my own head, I guess as a New Yorker, I was kind of holding out for the New York Times and. Because that would be the official, And the New York Times did a thing, and they called it a gem.
Right.
And it was one of 8 films that they recommended.
But they did like a blurb, not a whole review.
It
Or
was an article which talked about other films too, but it was
Right.
just like, here's some gems you can stream right now, and that to me was like the validation that New York Times likes it, yeah, I mean. But it's hard to, you read that and you go, it's, they love the film, it's a gem, but I wouldn't have made this film if Adrienne wasn't murdered. It's like,
right.
no matter what happens, it always goes very quickly right back to that. And
Yeah.
then when that happens, and it's like, my daughter doesn't have a mother. And so it's like this vicious cycle of, which is why, I do discuss in the film a little bit about closure, the concept of closure and how that's like, to me at least, is this mythical thing that doesn't exist, but it does for a lot of people. It doesn't for me, though.
Well, spinning gold out of the tragedy must help to get some kind of feeling of closure. It's like, well, at least I'm not
It's
wallowing in
gratification.
grief.
It's not closure. Closure to me is like, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I keep hitting this microphone. I'm a Jew. I talk with my hands. Maybe I should tie my hands behind me.
Yeah. We've got somebody here who can do that.
I'm sure. I heard about Rhinecliff.
Yeah.
It's what were we just talking about?
We're talking about closure. And,
Closure, yes.
And I'm going to read a quotation from you, from the movie. Yeah. You say, I struggle with the concept of closure. My life will always be about grief. There will always be that ghost in the room. The love that I had at that time, it didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And
where does it go? I mean, if you're madly in love with someone on a Monday, right? And Monday night, they're gone. You're still madly in love, right?
Right.
But unlike married couples or whatever who fall out of love, what happens to the person who's just stuck there with his love, right? What happens to that person or that mother or that child or the feelings that people have just don't go away, which is why for me it's like, how do you get closure? When does that moment come where you're like, I'm done. I've arrived.
Yeah, and what would that look like?
Yeah.
I'm done.
It's like, you're in the car, you're driving, you hear a song. Oh, we used to dance that song all the time, but you know what? I don't feel sad now because I have closure.
Right.
I try to envision, closure is just a word, but like you say, what does that look like?
Yeah.
To someone who actually has closure, what does that look like? Do you just not get sad anymore? I mean, so it's a foreign
idea.
concept to me.
Yeah. You said the love is always there and the grief is always there, but the grief doesn't seem to define you.
No, because that's the key is to move forward, right? People who have experienced death and sudden death, tragic death, this sort of like language that you learn to speak with other people who have experienced it. And so it's all about moving forward. You don't forget. There's no closure, but you can still move on and move forward and have like a healthy, loving life. You could find love again. You could do all kinds of things. But the idea that that other part of you is closed.
And have you found love again?
I have 2 dogs. 2 cats.
Have you?
I did. I was in a long-term relationship.
Okay.
That ended about a year ago, and yeah, I mean, we all kidding aside, we can have multiple children, multiple dogs, cats, all kinds of things, but like, for some reason, I think we're told that love is this finite thing that. So even though I still have feelings that I don't think will ever go away, it doesn't limit my ability to move forward with my life and be healthy and productive and have romance again and
which is
blah, blah, blah.
Great. I'm projecting now into like the romance you had, the long-term romance, must have been tough for her in some way to live in the shadow of this person who's gone, who you're never having
She might even be listening.
Who you're never having another argument
Hi,
with.
if you are.
Yeah, hello.
We're still very good friends.
And so
it was tougher.
And did you guys discuss that between yourselves? I'm guessing you did. That was.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, and not because she may be listening.
Hello.
But she or any woman really would need to be a saint. I've got baggage. I don't hide from it. I also think we all have baggage of some sort. So, and I think that's how she always looked at it. Like, I had my baggage, she had hers. We all have baggage.
Right.
And she never looked at whatever I did, like whether it was photos in my house, which I keep because it's my child's mother, or a foundation which I run, or anything like that, or a movie I was going to make. She never looked at that in a competitive, jealous way. She got it. She understood it.
So she's nearly a saint. What you're saying?
She is nearly a saint. Yeah.
Yeah.
In that respect, absolutely, because that's a huge undertaking for someone to.
Because you're holding your baggage all the time, moving forward with it, taking it to meetings of the foundation.
Yeah. I'm not just holding my baggage. I'm like throwing it in someone's face.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was a huge part of my life, which I think very genuinely she understood. That was one of the reasons why we were together so long, because it was an important part of my life. And, whether it's that or something else, I mean, people need to connect and understand each other and accept parts of people's lives.
Now, Adrienne's dad died when she was young.
Yep.
And her mom had to deal with bringing up a daughter. Mm-hmm. And I guess other siblings, with a recently departed father. Was her mom helpful to you in dealing with your daughter on these things?
She was, in the sense that she adores my daughter, and they became even closer than they ever were, because when Adrienne was killed, Sophie was not quite 3. So there's only so much kind of interaction you can have with a 2 and 3/4-year-old child. So over the years, as Sophie has grown and matured, they are extremely close. And I think that connection to her grandmother, who we've all learned is where Adrienne got a lot of stuff from, in terms of her personality, her humor. And so I think that connection is so strong and has been incredibly helpful.
Right. I loved the mom. And
she's amazing.
Yeah. And there was a part, again, spoiler alert, cover your ears, a part in the documentary where you went to Adrienne's high school. Right. Where she had been in theater, and there I guess there was a tradition there. Everybody signed their names backstage.
Yeah.
And she found where Adrienne had signed her name.
Yeah.
And the mom says to you, and I'm like, it was so shockingly beautiful. She said, "Here, put your hand here."
Right.
And she put her hand on top of Adrienne's signature, and you put your hand on top of hers. It was it was just such a beautiful, simple thought.
Yeah.
A really moving part of the movie.
We did that just for the cameras. That was all staged, Norm. Most of the movie is completely staged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you got me, because so much of it was really deeply moving and a wonderful tribute to Adrienne.
Thank you.
Yeah. So how's your daughter doing? Growing up with all of this? I mean, it seems like it would be kind of a burden. For those of you who are going to shell out some bucks to see the movie tomorrow, hopefully, we go into that, and she's in the film and she talks about her feelings. I've always kind of equated it to someone who's born blind, right? If you've never seen before, you, in a sense, don't really know fully what you're missing, right? So conceptually, she understands. She doesn't have a mother, obviously, but she herself has no real visceral idea of what that means. She can see her friends with their mothers. She understands what a mother is, but she doesn't understand that in her own life. And that's a whole different thing. You and I could watch a movie about surfing. Right.
But until you're on that water and the crest is, we don't really know what surfing is. So it's that kind of thing.
Well, it seems kind of frustrating as a parent to know that you can't quite get there and relate on that level with her.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because I've had to be both mother and father for her.
Right.
And I think I'm a lot more evolved as a man that a lot of other men may be. So I think some of that nurturing and emotional whatever was more natural to me than it might be for some other guys. But I'm not her mother, I'll
Right.
never be her mother. I'll never be, I think about things where like, a mom will sneak into bed with the daughter when she's upset about something and stroke her hair and say, "Oh, you had a bad day." Like, Dad can't just do that the same way.
Right.
We could try, but we can't.
And I get a feeling she got to know her mother a lot more throughout the making of this documentary.
Yes.
You see her reading her mom's journals, and she probably sees the video you had, all the old film was just spectacular. It just boggled my mind to think of all the research you must have done to come up with all of that and put together this documentary.
No, that's a good observation because that's true. The archival was abundant, but that means you then have to go through it all. And
Right.
Adrienne had all these tapes, and like mini DVs, and like formats that we haven't used in 20 years, 30,
Right.
whatever. And they just were sitting up on a top shelf in my bedroom for years, and I would stare at them and like, someday I'll look at what's on. And then I decided to make this film, and I was like, all right, take them down. Get
The
them
time is
digitized,
now.
and just go through each and every one, and like all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, there's an interview with her when she was 30 years old, and it was done by her friend Bennett Miller, who's now one of like the most famous movie directors.
And were they all still available to be digitized? Like some
Yeah.
of them didn't turn to dust, or
No. So it was like this never-ending cycle of, okay, here's today's batch, and I would just stay up
Right.
late watching all this stuff, and then be like, just nonsense, gold. Like it was so gratifying to find something that was just really stand out for the film.
must have been very weird, very emotional, seeing this both as her husband
Yeah.
and as a filmmaker. Separate lenses, like, okay, that's really moving. I'm going to cry now. And okay, as you said, this is gold. This is really going to help move the narrative forward.
Yeah, and not to discount the non-gold, because it was all great,
Yeah.
but I would watch it purely to see what's going to end up in that 100-minute film or 90-minute film, whatever.
You say purely, but I can't imagine that you ever put your personal, emotional part out of it.
No, that part never left.
Right.
But like, what I was looking for specifically
Gotcha.
was clips to use in the film.
Okay. So the guy who killed her, the murderer, is behind bars. Has he seen this film?
Oh, I doubt it.
And you
I've never been in prison, Norm, so I don't know if they get HBO there.
H-
Although
H-
they probably do.
HBO Plus or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you saw him once. You went to the
Yeah.
prison.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And-
I've seen him multiple times in court
Right.
at different hearings and things like that.
Right.
And I spoke to him at sentencing. He didn't look at me though.
And there are quotations from you from that era, the court era.
Yeah.
And you were really not wishing any sort of long health on him.
No.
You were quite explicit and like
Yes.
really just wanting him to rot in hell.
Yes.
And then, I don't know, a decade and a half later, you went to see him in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And what was your goal? What were you hoping to get out of that?
It was twofold. One was to find out what happened that day and believe it. I didn't want another story.
Because he'd had 2 stories already.
And then also to humanize her to him,
Right.
for him, so that, I was able to sort of just assume the limited amount of time he had with her alive
Right.
and what he remembers. And what he remembers, and perhaps all he knows, is a terrified person screaming for the police.
Right.
I wanted him to see a mother, a wife, a daughter, an actor, a friend. I wanted him to see a human being, so that maybe when he lies his head down at night, he's haunted by that, so that he understands what he took,
Right.
who he took.
Now, when you started speaking in that little interview room with him, and there was a translator there
Not
too.
much different than this room, Norm.
No. he started right out with like a lot of remorse and apologizing, and said that he thought about that every day, and he was so sorry. Did your attitude about him, like wanting him to rot in hell, change that day?
No.
Okay.
No, because I'm not sure I believe the remorse is directed in the right place. When I left the interview that day and I was talking to the warden before we left, he said, "So, what'd you think? How'd it go?" And I said, "Well, he says he's sorry, right?" And the warden, who was just like straight out of central casting,
right,
whatever you would imagine a warden being, he was like, "Yeah, sorry for myself." And I was like, "Yeah, maybe,
probably,
maybe."
And you said your second goal that day was to get him to know who Adrienne was.
Yeah.
This person who was just a person in a body,
right,
for him. And do you think you succeeded on that account?
I do. I think people who see the film, to me, and others have said they agree, there's... Oh, Jesus. I should be a mime.
Banging the microphone, yeah.
I should do something with these
hands. Tie those hands behind your back,
other than hit microphones. There is a sense that when he's seeing the photos that I show him, that he's turned in some way. But I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Restorative justice is a big thing. In fact, Van Jones had a show on CNN a couple of years ago where he would bring people together, prisoners and of families of the victims.
Yeah.
And the thing that connects all of those stories usually is that the prisoner really wants to do whatever he can to make it up to the family. So it's like, whatever you need. I'm sorry, and blah, blah, blah. And, sometimes there's a hug it out moment, and sometimes there isn't. This guy didn't have that. He had to be courted and coaxed into the interview. Like, he had put himself first all the time. I'm going to feel this. I'm going to be nervous. I'm going to feel scared. I'm going to feel... And
right.
Much of that courtship is not in the film because it's just, lots of things couldn't end up in the film. But my approach with him was just to really give tough love. So, like, there was a letter, let's say, where he would be like, "I owe you everything. I'll whatever you need. I'll be a man. I'll stand up. I owe this to you and your family." And then, like, 3 weeks later, because it was like a cycle, I had sent a letter, and then it would take 3 weeks to come back, and blah, blah, blah. And then his next letter would be like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to be on camera. I'm too scared. And so my response, rather than to beg and plead, which I physically couldn't do, would just be like, to give him back every one of his, whatever he
You said this, you said that.
Yeah. So you said you owe me. Is this your idea of paying me back? You said you're a man. Is this the man you are? Is this who you... And I just hammered him.
Wow.
And I put that letter in the mailbox, and I remember saying, he's probably going to write me back a letter with like one sentence, "Go fuck yourself."
Right.
But it worked. He said, "You're right. I'll do it. Just tell me." He said, "Just give me a date so I can prepare."
Well, it's an enormously moving part of the documentary. And it's nice to hear that you feel you succeeded at letting him know who Adrienne was. And now we're out of time. And you've succeeded letting us know who Adrienne was. And the film certainly succeeds in sort of showing her life beyond just sort of the famous parts of it.
Well, thank you for
it's a wonderful tribute and a beautiful piece of your heart is what it feels like watching it. And I guess that's why I thank you for making it, because it's really a piece of your heart out there. Everybody, thanks for tuning in. You can see Andy Ostroy's amazing film called Adrienne tomorrow at 2 p.m. at Upstate Films. You can go to AdrienneShellyFoundation.org if you want to know more about what it does. And Andy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Moving and wonderful interview. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a good Friday. Good night.